In this lesson, I'm going to talk about how to use EVE-NG. When logging into the program, we have two console options, one is the native console and one is the HTML5 console option.
If you choose the native console, you can connect with terminal programs such as PuTTY or Secure CRT. When you select HTML5, you can make console connections to devices via HTML. Let's log in using the native console. When we have made our introduction, we can create a new lab here, or you can import a previously created lab, or you can export a lab that you have created yourself. First, let me show you how to create a new lab, and then let me show you how you can import and run an existing lab. Let's create a new lab by clicking Add New Lab here. Let's give it a name. Here you can type the name of the person who created the lab. You can also write an explanation here. Let's save our lab. Now after adding our lab, we can add our objects by clicking on the plus here. Let's select the node, add a router and a switch. When we write virtual, you can see virtual iOS router, switch and virtual PC here. There is also virtual PC default here. We also installed Cisco virtual router and Cisco virtual switch. Now I select the router from here. Here you can type the number of routers you want to add and specify the name. I write R and dash here, and when the routers are added, my first router will be R-1 and the second router will be called R-2. Here you can adjust the CPU and RAM settings. You can also determine the number of Ethernet ports on it here. If you need more interfaces, you can increase the number here. Here you can choose how to make the console connection. We will connect from Telnet. We say save. We now have two routers added here, called Router 1 and Router 2. When we are going to make the cable connections of our devices, our device needs to be turned off. When it is turned on, you cannot make the cable connections. From here we pull it and drop it on our device. You can also choose which interfaces to use here. Let's choose the Gigabit 0/2 port of the Router 2 and the Gigabit 0/2 port of the Router 1. I say save. We've connected our devices together. Now let's add a switch. I right-click and select node. Let's call it here by typing virtual. Here you can write down how many to add. Let's add 3, and name it switch dash. Here you can set the RAM and Ethernet numbers. I say OK. Our first device here, our second device here, was 3 here, this was 4, which was 5. You can change their names by clicking on node here. You can't change devices when they're on, devices must be turned off. I changed the names of our devices, and we need to make their connections while they are turned off. I choose 0 to 0 on the switch side and Gigabit 0 to 0 on the router side. I say save. Let's connect the switch here and the switch here. I say save. Let's connect the switch here to this router. I say save. You can start when you right-click on it, or you can run all devices at once by saying Start All Node from the More Action section from here. By making Start All Node, I make all the devices work. Once we click on our device, the console opens. When we log in, it asks for permission to open the terminal program we use here because we select the native console. I give my permission. I click on Router 2 and give it permission. I click on Switch 3, I give permission to it. It's currently connecting to our devices. Here you can add text by right-clicking. Let's write an essay as an example. Here you can adjust the font size and color. You can right-click on it and make edits. From here you can align the article. Here you can make the text bold or italic. When we make it transparent here, there is no color in the background. Let's say save. That's how you can pull it out. Here you can add custom shape as a square or circle. As an example, let's add a circle and save it. Let's bring it here like this. Let's grow it a little bit. Let's right-click on it, make edits, and change the background color and say OK. You can add circles this way, and let's add a rectangular custom shape. This is how you can use custom shapes when you're styling. Let's edit this and change the background color. This way you can use custom shapes. Now let's turn our console back on. Let's write no. After making any configuration to our devices, you can print the running config to the startup config by typing copy running config startup config. After registering with the startup, you can also export the configs of the devices here. When we right-click on it and export, it exports the startup config file of our device. You can also see the exported configs here. The process is going on right now. Let's check whether it is exported. After export, you can see the configuration of Router 1 in startup config. There is currently no configuration here as the router's settings are empty. Let's get out of here, come back to Router 1 and enter a command. Let's write enable and change the hostname to global config mode.
Let the host name be R1. Let's save the settings we made by typing right. After saving the settings, you can export again. Why are we exporting this?
When you make a lab, you can also export the files in this lab and share them with someone else, and the person you share the lab with can import this lab and run startup configs.
Now let's export from here and check our startup configs. Here you can see that the hostname is R1.
We get a copy of the startup config on our router here. Now let's log out of here and download and open one of the labs I saved earlier. In more action, I turn off all devices by making stop all node and exit this lab.
You can export by selecting the lab you saved here. Now let me show you how to import a lab.
As an example, I come under the topic of OSPF in CCNP training, where I download the OSPF Lab in the resources section.
Let me also download a lab from the network security section. Here, too, let's download the AAA lab and come back to EVE-NG.
Here we need to open the file we downloaded by importing.
Now let's upload the lab file with the zip extension that we downloaded from here. We have one AAA, one GRE, one MST, and one OSPF lab.
I have downloaded the MST and GRE files before. Now we select our files and say upload.
After uploading our file here, our file is imported. Let's import our other file. Let's upload this. Now let's open our AAA lab.
This is how you can see the labs I saved. Now let's come to the startup config. When you go to startup config and select router 1 there, you can see the interface settings and all other settings on this router.
Let's log out and come to more action and get all our devices working.
If you have trouble opening labs when you install them, or if the configuration of the device comes up empty, you go to the startup config and select the device, and when you copy and paste the configuration here into the router, the configuration here automatically goes to the router.
Let's log out of here and open router 1. Let's switch to enable mode and write a show IP interface brief.
Here you can see that the IP settings of our device have been made. If the settings of the device are blank when you install the lab, you can switch to global config mode and come to the startup config from here and copy the config contents of the relevant device and paste it back into the device to make the settings work.
Or you do it manually yourself, however you prefer. I write end and I exit here. Now let's close the lab.
First of all, let's close our devices and then our lab. I make a stop all node.
Now let's open our OSPF lab. I choose OSPF and say open. I come to more action and make start all node. Here you can see alerts about when our devices are up and running. At the moment, all of our coffers have been opened. Here let's open router 1 and check it. Let's check the startup configs when turning on our device.
You can see the startup configs of all your devices here. Let's look at router 1.
You can see all the configurations on router 1 here. Let's look at router 3. In the same way you can see the configurations of router 3 here.
Now let's check our settings by typing show run on router 1. In this lab, I have already made and saved all the settings except for the OSPF configuration. After you open this lab, you don't need to make any settings, just enter the configurations in the OSPF lab with me.
Let's write a show IP interface brief. Here you can see that the IP addresses of our interfaces are set. I used EVE-NG while doing labs in CCNP training, and you can use GNS3 if you want. The choice is yours.
If you use EVE-NG, you can download and use labs that I have prepared beforehand. That's all we'll tell you in this lesson for now, so goodbye to see you in our next lesson.